What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to install laminate flooring from start to finish. So we're going to be going over what kind of tools you need, how to cut around curved objects, how to go from room to room without using transition strips, and really everything you need to know for installing laminate flooring. So you're going to want to stay tuned for the entire length of this video so you don't miss any of these tips and tricks that I'm about to share with you. Let's get started. All right, guys, so the first thing you're going to need to know is how much laminate flooring do you actually need. So in order to determine that, you need to know the square footage of the area that you're working with. So we're actually putting laminate in this kitchen, the living room over there, and a hallway, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to show you how much we're going to need for the kitchen specifically. So all you're going to do is grab your tape measure, measure the width and the length of the room, multiply those together, and then that'll give you the amount of square footage that you need. So in this example, so we're at about 17 feet that way. All right, so this kitchen is 17 by 14 roughly. So that gives us 238 square feet of flooring that we're gonna need. Now, you never wanna buy the exact amount. You're gonna wanna account for some overage because you're probably gonna have some miscuts, you're gonna have some scrap. So always shoot for about 15% more than the actual square footage that you have. All right, guys, so as you can see, we've got all the baseboard pulled out. We've got the old underlayment ripped up as well. We're not going to be using that because the new flooring that we have has the padding attached to it, and it's quite a bit thicker than the original laminate that was here. So before we get started, I did want to talk to you about the parts of a laminate flooring plank because there's a tongue side and a groove side, and you need to know which is which. So as you can see here, this top part, this is the tongue side, this bottom is the groove side. So the smaller profile of these lips is the tongue side, the larger one is the groove side. So you've got a tongue side on the top and the left, and you've got a groove side on the bottom and the right. So you always want to start your planks up against the wall with the tongue side facing the wall, and that'll leave this groove side here, which will be ready to accept the tongue side of the next piece, okay? So as far as underlayment goes, so if you're using a laminate plank that's like this is a relatively good quality piece. It's fairly thick, 12 millimeters thick. It already has the padding attached to it. You're probably not going to need any type of additional underlayment or padding, or padding to go on the floor. This is going to be plenty thick. It's not going to give too much, so you're probably not going to need that. You can put it there if you want to. It's not going to hurt anything. Now, if you're going with a plank like the one we pulled up, which is relatively thin, and it doesn't have any kind of padding on the back, you're going to want to put some padding down, and that's going to help. When you walk on this, it's going to bow a little bit, and you're going to feel that as you step on it. So when you put that padding down, it helps absorb some of that shock so you don't feel the floor giving as much underneath you. Okay, now as far as tools go, you're going to need your standard tools, a tape measure, a pencil, a square, things like that. But as far as things that are specific to laminate flooring, you're going to need a non-marking mallet or hammer of some sort. You're going to need a tapping block. You're going to need a pull bar. And you're going to need some spacers. Now, you can get these spacers, I don't know, Lowe's, Home Depot. I think I got these at Lowe's. You can order them online. If you use the wedge style spacers, the problem with those is that if your drywall doesn't go all the way to the floor and you've got that wedge style and you start tapping against this laminate, it's just going to push those spacers out. They're not going to stay in place very well for you. As opposed to this style, you sit this edge behind the edge of the laminate flooring, and this part butts up against the drywall, so you can tap against this and it's not going to go anywhere. So definitely get these if you're going to be doing some laminate flooring. You also might want to pick up some wood glue. This is helpful for when, let's say you get to a piece and it's just a little sliver of a piece, nothing you can do about it at that point. You're going to want to put some of that wood glue in the groove and then tap it tight, and that way you don't have to worry about it popping loose. So I think that's all the preliminary stuff. Don't know if I said it or not, but these spacers, when you take these spacers back out, it creates a gap all the way around the edge of the floor, and that's what allows the floor to expand and contract without hitting the walls and creating, or forcing the flooring to buckle or warp or anything like that. So do not skimp out on the spacers. You need these. An alternative to these would be if you have some scrap flooring laying around, some scrap laminate, maybe the old stuff that you took out, as long as it's not too thick, what you can do is you can rip that into several pieces and then screw that to the bottom side of the wall, and then that'll act as a spacer as well. And because it's screwed into the wall, you don't have to worry about it popping out or coming loose and just driving you nuts. So with all that out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and get started. We're gonna start in this corner. With laminate, you're always gonna start in a corner of the room and work your way out. You don't start in the middle and go both ways. That'll just make your life a whole lot more difficult than it needs to be. So we're gonna start in the corner and work our way out. All right, now another thing you're gonna wanna do before we get started is that you're gonna wanna have 3 or 4 boxes of this laying out in the floor that you're gonna work from. Don't pick a single box, lay all of that, and then grab a second box, lay all of that. These boxes, the patterns in them are slightly different, the color tones are slightly different, and so you want a good mix of all of that so that way it looks more similar to natural wood flooring throughout your house. So just wanted to throw that in there before I forgot. All right guys, so we're here in the corner where we're gonna start, and what I did and what you need to do whenever you're starting this is your very first row that's gonna be going up against the wall, you need to cut the tongue side of that off. Okay, so you need to do it for the top and the left side. So every piece that you start that's gonna go up against this wall and this left side wall where the tongue's gonna be, that needs to be cut off. So typically when you get to the end of a row, you're gonna cut that piece, and then that scrap piece that's left over, you can use that to start your second row or your next row, and so the tongue side will already be cut off. But for your first row, you're gonna have to do that manually. So to do this, all you do is put it in place. I've got my bag of spacers here. I'm gonna put a spacer here. I would put one here, and I would put one here, and then I would slide it up against the wall. But as you can see, this flooring is so thick, it's not gonna slide underneath this door jamb. So what we're gonna have to do first is take our oscillating tool, and we're gonna have to trim that out some so that way this flooring will slide underneath there properly. So if you've got lots of other door jambs to contend with, it's probably a good idea just to go ahead and do that first, get it knocked out, and then that way you don't have to worry with it later on. You can just do it all now, and it should be smooth sailing from here on out. All right, so we got our door jambs cut out. We're ready to install. So this first piece, push it up against the wall. And you see it slides under there perfectly, no issues. We're gonna put our spacers in. There you go. Now we're ready for the second piece. So with your second piece, all you're gonna do is you're gonna take the tongue side, hold it up at an angle, insert it into the groove side, and simply lower it in place. Just like that. Okay? So we're gonna get our spacers put in for here as well. And then we'll simply just push this like so. We'll put another spacer over here. And so what's gonna end up happening with our next row and subsequent rows, when we go to start tapping this, it may try to separate here. So we're gonna put these spacers in here as well, just to make sure that this doesn't try to separate on us. And this gap will actually be filled in later on with quarter round, if that's the route you wanna take. I've even done it where I've taken a transition strip that matches this, and I've cut that lip side, that underside off to where the transition strip is completely flat, and I've just put that here, and that gives it a really clean, sleek look as well. All right, so when you get to the end of the row, you're gonna take your piece of laminate, And obviously we've got to make a cut here because a full plank is not gonna fit here. But what you don't want to do, you don't want to hold it up like you were going to install it and then make a mark there and then cut it, because then you're not going to have a tongue side right here to snap into the groove. So what you need to do is rotate your piece around 180 degrees where the groove side is facing up. And then what you can do is lay your plank down, butt it up against the wall, and then pull it out roughly 1/4 inch to mimic the spacing that you have here and on the tongue side on the left hand side of the wall, and then make a mark right here. So I'm going to mark this piece of laminate right at the edge of this piece of laminate, not at the edge of the groove, but at the edge of the laminate itself. So I've got a mark there. So now I'm going to take this to the miter saw and cut this, and then we'll reinstall it. Now if you don't have a miter saw, you can use a circular saw, you can use a jigsaw, use whatever you got to make that cut. All right, so here's the piece that we cut, and it's the same exact concept. Hold it at an angle, lock it in place, and just rotate it down. Just like that. And you can see we've got enough space in here, got space in there. We'll put these spacers in place. And then now, if you have any gapping here where these two planks meet, this is where this tool comes in handy. This is your pull bar is what it's called. So you can use that in areas like this to close any gaps that you may have. So just for illustration, put it in there, hold it down, and just give it a few hits, and that should close up any gaps that you have. All right, now to begin your second row, what you would be able to do is take the scrap piece that you cut off the end of your first row and use that to start your second row. But because we cut the tongue off of this, we're not going to be able to do that. So we're going to have to grab a new piece, we'll cut it to this same length, and then we'll go ahead and install it. Now when you're doing this, what you want to be mindful of is that your seams don't fall too close to one another. Because if we had a seam here and then a seam here, you know, or even right there, you know, that's really close. You've got roughly 48 inches to play with, so you really don't need to do anything like that. And actually some manufacturers will tell you where, or the minimum spacing allowed for that. So just be mindful of that. You don't want to do that. It's just not going to look good. So what we're going to do, this is a pretty good looking piece. I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to cut another piece to this same length, and then we'll install it. All right, so I got my piece cut to length. Same idea. We're going to put a spacer here. But in order to install this, it's kind of the same concept as when you're applying one you know, this way. You're just going to hold this up at an angle. So this is the way I like to do it. I'll get it in there at an angle. I'll add my spacer up against the wall. I'll push this tight against the wall, and then I'll push this plank. I'll apply pressure to this plank, pushing into this plank at an angle, and then just work it into place like so. Now, when you do that, oftentimes what's going to happen is it's going to lift this first row, and that's because there's just not enough weight on your flooring system yet to hold this in place. So your first couple rows, they're going to be a little bit more challenging than the rest, but to overcome this, you'll just simply kind of hammer fist it down or tap it with a mallet, and that'll help keep it down where it needs to be. Okay? So for the next piece, when you get to installing a piece like this where it has to snap into here and here, all you got to do is take your plank, hold it up at an angle. I'm butting the tongue side of this up against the lip or the edge of this laminate. So it can't go any further this way. It's pushed up against it. Can't go any further this way because the tongue is inside the groove. Then we're going to lower this down. I'm holding pressure against this plank to keep it from coming loose. And then we're going to drop it down. So now you can see we've got a gap here that we've got to close. So in order to do that, you're simply gonna put your fingers underneath here as best you can and try to tilt it up. You can see it closed here. So you're tilting this up and pushing it in at the same time. And there you go. Now that is locked in place. So what we're gonna do now is use that tapping block to make sure this row is snapped securely into this row. And hold it in place, and you wanna hold this down firmly, because if this slips when you hit it, it could peel this lip up, and then you've gotta replace this piece. So make sure you hold this down with a fair amount of pressure, and then just tap it in. And we'll go back to this first plank as well and do the same thing. Make sure we're locked in. All right guys, so we're at a spot now where we're gonna need to notch this laminate in order to fit around the cabinet. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna take your laminate like you normally would install it, with the tongue side up, groove side facing the bottom. Let's see. We're gonna go ahead and lock it into the previous piece. So just hold it up at an angle, and then we're gonna slide it up to the cabinet. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a mark right here on the laminate at the edge of this kick plate. So we're gonna, we still need to leave some space in like we do with the rest of the laminate. So about 1/4 inch off of that, make a mark, okay? Then we're gonna pull it out, and we're gonna install as best we can the tongue side of this into the groove side up here, and we're gonna butt it up to this kick plate. And then we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna make a mark about 1/4 inch off of here. Now I've already made my marks. I just did it not knowing that the camera wasn't filming. So I've already made the marks. Now what we need to do is connect them. So I'll get my framing square, show you how to do that, and then we'll notch this out with the jigsaw. All right, so all we're gonna do, we're gonna measure down from the top of the laminate to that mark that we made. And we're at about 2 7/8. So then we're gonna come up to this mark. We're gonna measure down 2 7/8. And if you have a speed square handy, use that. I just don't feel like getting mine. 2 7/8 is right here. And so now all we need to do is connect this dot to this dot and this dot to that dot. So use the framing square. That. And there you go. So this whole area is the area that'll need to be cut out, so that way this piece of laminate can slide in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and notch this out with a jigsaw and install it. All right, so this is what our piece looks like after it's been notched out. And then you're just gonna install it as you normally would. Now, it probably will be a little bit more tricky just because you've got cabinets to contend with, but it's the same concept. And get that left tongue side in first. And then we're gonna drop it down. And we're gonna work this in place. Just like that. Now, you can't really see it, but I don't have that 1/4 inch gap here running underneath here. So I'm gonna have to pull this back out, recut that a little bit, because I need to be able to get these spacers behind here, so that way I can maintain the spacing that I need for expansion and contraction. But that's all you would have to do. If you don't have a gap there either, just recut it and you can roll on. Now, when you get past this point, what are you supposed to do from here on out? Because you obviously can't install a full sheet because it's going to stick out too far. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take some of these sheets and rip them down to the same width as this piece here. Put your spacers in and then install them as you normally would. All right, so we're at the end of our row that goes underneath the cabinet, and we're left with this little piece and this door jamb to contend with. And there's no real way to install this like you normally would, holding it up at an angle and locking it in place. So what you have to do is slide it under the door jamb, get as much of that tongue in the groove as possible, and then push it in place as best you can. And then if you're left with any kind of gap there, all you have to do is take your pull bar, put it in place there, and give it a few taps, and that'll lock everything in place for you. So another quick tip for you guys, always inspect every piece of laminate flooring that you put down. I know it's a pain, I know it's time consuming, but what you don't want is to overlook damage like that and then that end up in your finished floor. It's easy to do, I've done it before, and then you've got to rip out several rows to get back to the piece that was messed up. So make sure you inspect every piece before you put it down. All right, so we're on the last row of laminate for the kitchen area. And as you can see, when you get here, you're not gonna have enough space to put in a full plank like we've been doing, so you're gonna have to rip this down. So all you need to do is grab your tape measure and measure the distance from the wall to the edge of the laminate. And here we've got about 4 inches. So we're gonna subtract a 1/4 inch from that, just to make sure we have a 1/4 inch of spacing along this back wall. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that your walls aren't gonna be perfectly square. So just because you measure 4 inches down here doesn't mean it's gonna be the same down, later down on the wall. So if I measure here, we're actually at 4 1/4. So if I were to cut this down here the same I did up here, this piece would be too narrow. We'd have too much of a gap on that back wall. So just make sure you measure all of your pieces individually. All right, so I've got that piece cut down to the width that we need. So we're gonna install it kind of the same way, put it in position, put our spacer in, and then rotate it down. Now as you can see, we don't have enough space now to use that tapping block in the corner like we've been doing. And this is where you're gonna need to use your pull bar. So to use this, you just push it in and then just hold some pressure downward and just tap it. And that's gonna lock it in place. All right, so we've made it from the kitchen down here to the living room area. So what I wanna do is show you how to go from one room to another without having to use transition strips. And in this case, it's really easy because you're still working, in this direction, so you're not gonna have to change anything up. But essentially all we're gonna have to do is notch out our piece to fit around this corner, and we're gonna have to notch around this corner of the wall and just bring the flooring into the living room. So I'm gonna make these notches, show you how to do that, and then later on in the video, we're gonna transition into the hallway, which is back this way, and so we'll have to install the laminate backwards, and I'm gonna show you how to do that as well. All right, so here you can see, we're just gonna make our knots like I've already shown you how to do. We're gonna line this plank up as though it's actually installed here. So this tongue is gonna overlap this plank, and the edge of this is gonna be flush with the edge of that, and then we'll make our mark about a 1/4 inch off, like that. Yep. And then the same thing on this side. Set it in place and make a mark here. And then we'll just connect these dots, cut this out, and then this piece will be ready to go. Now when you get to this section, we're gonna put this in place. We're gonna mark and cut the length of it first. So butt it up to your cabinet, pull it out about a 1/4 inch, mark it and then cut it, and then we'll come back and make the mark for our notch. All right, so here's the piece we're gonna use. So same concept. Just kind of line it up and make a mark here, about a 1/4 inch off the wall. And then I'm gonna make a mark here. So it'll be something like that. We'll cut this out and then we'll be ready to go. All right, so here's what the piece looks like after it's been notched. And we will just install this like we normally do. All right, now when you get to this spot, all you're gonna have to do is just take you a piece. You can get a new sheet if it's long enough. But what I'm probably gonna do is rip this down a little bit because this seam is pretty close to this one up here, and I want it to be staggered back a little bit more. So I'm gonna cut about 4 inches off of this. But anyways, I'll cut that off, and then we're just gonna notch it around this wall, just like you would notch it around anything else that is interfering with your installation, and then we'll just lock it in place. All right, so really that's all there is to it as far as getting from the, from one room to another without the transition. Now, when we get to this part of the wall, which is what we're gonna have to do now, we had to rip that piece in order to get it to fit. So for the row that's going along this wall, we're gonna have to rip all those pieces down to match the thickness or the width of what we have here. So we'll probably rip down 3 or 4 pieces to get us along this wall. So that's what you're gonna have to do in order to get this to fit. All right guys, so here we have the area where we're transitioning from the living room backwards into the hallway. And what we're gonna have to do is essentially install this laminate backwards. So when you make this notch, you wanna make sure you leave this tongue side on. If you don't wanna do a transition strip, you want everything to be seamless, you need this tongue side to be present. So what you would do is just install this like you normally would, and then we're gonna install a second row and butt it up against this wall. Now I still need to install the rest of the flooring in this living room first. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna install this piece, I'm gonna install a piece beside it, and then I'm gonna screw a 1x6 or 1x4 into the floor here. And that way, as I'm installing the flooring this way, I can still tap that flooring tight and have something to act as a backer for this piece here, because I don't have the wall with the spacers to do that. Now, when I was installing this floor, I did go ahead and finish the living room first, but for the sake of the video, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I transitioned into the hallway, just so you don't have to try and find it later on in the video. Now, when you have to transition backwards into an area, installing the flooring can be a bit more challenging because you're installing the planks backwards. So instead of snapping the tongue into the groove, you're trying to lock the groove into the tongue. But the process is pretty much the same. You want to lock in the short side of your plank first and then the long side. Now, installing flooring this way isn't usually all that difficult, but it is a bit more challenging than doing it the standard way. But if you don't want to use transition strips at every doorway, then this is the method you're going to have to use. So what I'm doing here is cutting out this padding because at a later date, I'll be installing laminate in this room as well, and I didn't want to use a transition strip. So for the time being, I'm going to put this underneath the carpet and just leave it as is. Now, as you can see, this piece is pretty wonky, but with a little bit of patience, I was able to work it into place without it breaking. All right, guys, so we've made it to this section in the floor where we've got this fiber optic cable to contend with. Now, when you get to a spot like this, you have a few options. You could just notch the entire, so if you had this piece like this, you could just notch this out and slide it in place, but then you're gonna have a big open area, a big cutout area in your plank flooring that's going to be exposed because the baseboard and the quarter round is not going to cover up all of that. Now, if you're okay with a little bit of that being exposed, you can go that route. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make sure that I have my laminate 2 pieces meeting right here where this fiber optic cable meets. So that way I can just notch out a little bit on this side of this plank, notch out some on this plank. So what I did with this row, the row prior to it, is I just planned to make sure that I didn't have any seam right here. So that way I could have a seam here and everything would look good. So I'm going to get this piece cut to length. And then what you're going to have to do is we're going to install this piece first on the right side. So normally we work left to right. On this particular row, we're going to work right to left. So we're going to put a spacer here and then just work this in backwards. All right, so I got our 2 pieces cut and notched out for our fiber optic cable. Now, because this piece is so small, I am going to use a little bit of wood glue on here just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Put some on this side as well. And again, we're going to be installing this from right to left. So we're going to get this piece put in. Gonna put our spacer on. And then normally we would insert the tongue into the groove, but on this, since we're going from right to left, we're gonna hold this piece up and the groove side is gonna slip in underneath the tongue and it's gonna lock in the same way, but we're just going backwards. So lock that in as best we can. Drop your plank down and then snap it in place like you normally would. And as you can see, we've got the perfect cutout for a fiber optic cable. All right, so we've made it to the point in the installation where we have to work around this bottom stair, and as you see, it's got a radius to it. So the best way I found to do this is we're gonna take our plank and we're gonna lock it in, and we're gonna get a measurement from the end of the groove to the face of this, I don't know, whatever you want to call this. So what I'm gonna do is take my speed square, butt it up to it, and then I'm just gonna measure from the groove to the end of that, and that puts us at about 2 5/8. Okay, so then I'm gonna put my plank in position as though it's actually going to be installed here. So on this other end, I'm going to line up the tongue with the groove of the previous piece as though it was actually installed. And I'm going to butt this groove up to here. Now you do want to make sure that your plank is square. So what we'll do to make sure it's square is take a measurement from here to here on both ends of this plank and make sure we're square. And you want to make sure that your plank is pushed up against the piece that you're trying to cut around. So it's about 3 1/2 and 3 1/2. All right, so we said that measurement was 2 5/8. So what we're gonna do is take your marker and a tape measure, and that's all you're gonna need. You're gonna put the tape measure right here in the center, and we're going to mark 2 5/8 all the way around. And so you want to keep your tape measure straight. You don't want to be bending it out like that. Keep it straight, and we'll just continue to mark 2 5/8. And you do want to try to mark it as close to the tape measure as you can. Okay, and then we'll repeat the process on this side using this side of the tape measure. All right, so now you can see we've got all these marks on here. We'll just take our marker, connect the dots, and then we'll cut this out with the jigsaw. All right, so as you can see, that got us really close, but it's still a little too tight. It's not gonna slide into place as is. So what I'm gonna do is just probably take like an 1/8 inch more off of that, and then we'll test fit it again. All right, so I'll trim this down a little bit more. Let's see if we can get it to fit. All right, there we go. Looks like we got a good fit. We got a little room there for expansion and contraction. I didn't want to leave a huge gap because I need to be able to fill this with caulk because I'm not going to be able to bend cord around or anything around this. So I didn't want too big of a gap for that reason. So that's really all it is to it. So what I like to do for these, for the sides of the curve, is I like to use this contour gauge. Now if you don't have one of these, I'll leave a link in the description so you can check it out for yourself, but they're really handy for things like this. The reason I didn't use it on the front side is because it's not quite big enough to capture the entire radius. So you can use it in that instance if it's big enough, but in my case it wasn't. So all you're going to do to use this is I'm going to run this parallel with the edge of this plank, and then you're just going to push it forward, and then you can see it starts to take the shape of the radius. Now I'm going to help it out a little bit and push these in place just to make sure I get it as accurate as possible. And then you lock it down, and you can see it gives you the exact radius of whatever you're working with. So I'm going to take a measurement from here to the end of this plank, and then I'm going to use this on the edge of my plank, just trace it out, and then cut that out with a jigsaw, and then it should fit perfectly in place. All right, as you can see, we've got a perfect fit, so we'll just repeat the process on the other side, and then we'll get this flooring done in the living room area and move on to the hallway. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I hope it's been helpful and that now you know everything you need to in order for your laminate flooring project to be a success. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments. Also, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Until next time, take care and God bless.